Today, we are joined by a great panel of exceptional minds in the industry. From the US, we welcome Melissa A. Berman, President and CEO of the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. And Melissa, joining Melissa, we also welcome Catherine Grum, a partner and head of family office services at BDO LLP, and Marie-Louise Gourlay, managing director of Europe, the Philanthropy Workshop. Facilitating this discussion today is Zofia, our Director of Membership and Development, who is making her debut as the chair. Thank you all for joining us today. Now handing over to Zofia. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Brighton. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, I'm just checking because of the issues. Welcome, everybody. We want this to be a flowy conversation. Please do not do cut in, when you have observation thoughts. I just really would like it to flow as freely as possible because it's a big topic. I'm really honoured to be chairing my first session today with such incredible women and great minds, and to be having a conversation with them, highlighting the importance of philanthropy and celebrating success. However, as we know, the demands for those with wealth are changing rapidly. I'd also like to cover in this short session the growing need for access to those with the ability to make change with their philanthropy, to clear, robust and knowledgeable advice on their donor and impact journeys, and the importance of collaborating in this world. It's our observation here at Philanthropy Impact that professional advisory firms, there's a sneak preview to my nerves, particularly here in Europe, must find the ways to future-proof and meet this rapid change at pace, and to be able to retain the relationships with new generation of clients on a values level more than anything else. We used to refer to this as an emerging client base, but I believe it's safe to say that we are now here and the predicted changes from the Great Wealth Transfer have already begun. And so with that, I'd like to kick off today's discussion by asking you each to give a brief 30-second intro to who you are and your experiences, and also give maybe some short observations around the changing trends you are seeing in philanthropy. As you are from the US with a keen sense to the UK, Melissa, can I ask that you start with you?
Happy to. Hello, everybody. I'm Melissa Berman. I'm the president of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. We are a nonprofit social enterprise providing consulting, advisory, and program management services around the world. We annually advise on or facilitate more than $500 million US to more than 30 countries. And I would say that over the last decade or so, what we've seen is really the development of something that we could call a global culture of giving among the most powerful and privileged on the planet, an expectation that they should be not only generous, but also engaged, a willingness to commit big sums in big bets to tackle big problems. Increasingly, we see people willing to take a real systems approach, and we are beginning to see, but I wouldn't say it's taken hold as well as we might hope yet, a rise in a much more trust-based philanthropic approach, exemplified by the kind of large unrestricted gifts that the American Mackenzie Scott has done so at such huge volume over the last 3 or 4 years. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And Mary-Lou, at the TWP, you seem to change the way people are approaching their philanthropy within your community. And are you echoing maybe the trust philanthropy that you're seeing some of this has just mentioned?
Yeah, we absolutely are, and thank you for the question. So we are, just to give a brief intro for those of us who don't know the Philanthropy Workshop. So we're a non-profit organisation working with a community of about sort of 400 philanthropists from around 25 different countries, but predominantly the UK, the US, Canada, and a handful of others. And we're really focused on helping people increase their impact through collaboration, through continual learning, and really through a focus on impact and greater mobilisation, activation of resources. So we've always, obviously we've seen a lot of evolution in, I think we were established about 27 years ago, a lot of change in that time as we keep abreast of trends, and I hope increasingly start to, play our own role in contributing towards those. I think we've always looked at the trust-based approach and realized that in some cases we have been espousing that for a good number of years. I think it's easier for people to wrap their hands around it now because there are greater sort of, people have established what the tenets are and what that looks like. But there's definitely a place for strategic and trust-based philanthropy, and people, particularly in the pandemic, really embraced that, and that was sometimes very consciously and intentionally, and for other people it was just a natural understanding of, well, how do we tackle this global challenge that we're all facing, when it was a real level setter in lots of ways, in that it was global, it affected each one of us, and I think within that we also saw people turning inwards to their communities and really looking at the places that they were giving and seeing community-based approaches, which often meant developing relationships in a very different way, and really working more with their peers. So sort of saying, in real time, how are you tackling this? Are you doubling down on your existing donors? How are you doing the due diligence when you can't go and do a site visit? How are you building up a relationship? And we saw just a very natural move towards more collaboration, towards more unrestricted funding, towards essentially a much more trust-based approach. And we're now sort of watching that behavior and seeing, well, to what degree is that pendulum going to swing back, but hoping for some more continual long-term changes within that.
Thanks, Mary-Lou. I think that kind of like nicely introducing Catherine. And sorry, experience here.
Well, I'll jump in there. Hopefully you can hear me. I don't know if it's your Wi-Fi, Sophia, or mine, but please someone shout if you can't hear me. So I'm a partner at BDO, and so unlike my fellow panelists who are obviously deeply steeped in the world of philanthropy, my experiences and those of my colleagues are more sort of broader wealth discussions with our high net worth and increasingly ultra high net worth clients around what their wealth means for them. And definitely as part of that, we are seeing an increasing interest and sort of appetite to look at their philanthropy. I think particularly in the post-COVID world, and now with the sort of crisis of cost of living crisis, clients are thinking a lot more about how much do they need, what's the sort of fundamental purpose of their wealth, and that's sort of coupled with concerns about actually the negative or the potentially negative impact significant wealth can have on the next generations. And really, it's interesting. One of the things I was reflecting on before the call is how many families are thinking about the impact of that level of wealth and not necessarily thinking about philanthropy as part of the solution for their family. And I think certainly for those advisors like myself who work at sort of multidisciplinary firms, our clients may not be actively talking to us about philanthropy at all. And it's something for everybody to have in the back of their mind to be able to open up some of those conversations and encourage those who are new to philanthropy, as opposed to the sort of, they might have been making charitable gifts in the past, but perhaps not on the same scale or with as much sort of strategic focus on what they're doing to really help them develop what they're doing further.
Thanks, Catherine. That kind of, I had a conversation recently with a tax advisor when I was trying to explain what I do and why I do what I do. And I said, why would you have like this idea that people who are giving this much money away to charities, that you wouldn't want a professional advisor to do? You wouldn't just have somebody, you wouldn't just go for your tax returns yourself, would you? You wouldn't do this with your law. You wouldn't just go and do it. You want someone who's qualified and knowledgeable. So why wouldn't you want the same thing for your impact journeys? And it was like a light bulb went off in his head. It was brilliant. But on that, Melissa, from your perspective, what do you think needs to happen in the world of philanthropy advice? Does it need to be professionalized? Do you think that that's something that would increase giving and allow more impact with philanthropy? Melissa? Sorry.
Well, I think my colleagues and I will all universally agree that yes, that would be good. I think that legitimately, though, there are some people whose approach to giving means they don't need philanthropic advice. And that may simply be because they are committed to a core set of institutions, often ones they've been personally affiliated with. And those organizations are ones they have great relationships with, and they don't have any desire or need to go further, right? So I think we need to recognize that for many people, just as they don't necessarily need professional investment advice because they put their investments into index funds, there are many people who don't need philanthropy advice because they support a community foundation, alma mater, local house of worship, local arts and healthcare organizations. So I think it's only respectful to acknowledge that not everybody needs this kind of support. I think for people who are looking to sort of solve a problem or see a change in the world, it can be much more helpful to have philanthropy advice. It can help them understand the environment that they're working in. It can keep them from becoming the victims of their last conversation, from putting their philanthropy resources into the hands of the most charming person they've met. And so I think over time, the field, as people increasingly recognize that there is a knowledge base around philanthropy and that you can make a decision about whether you want to tap into that knowledge base, just the way you make a decision about whether you want, you know, a real estate broker or to house hunt on your own, that will result in much more awareness. Personally, I think it's terrific that there are lots of universities around the world that are developing programs in philanthropy. That helps us point to philanthropy as an area of expertise and gets us out of the amateur advice world.
Thank you. Mary-Lou, what do you think that is the biggest blocker to people actually going and asking for this kind of advice? That potentially, could it be a blocker to people giving, the fact that they don't realise that this advice is at their fingertips? Or is it not at their fingertips?
No, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, Sophia, exactly. So I think there's a lot of people that don't realise that this advice does exist, and that there are a lot of people who've been doing this work over, you know, many years, and have some extraordinary best practices, and that could be the advisors or it could be the philanthropists themselves. They have some best practices that could and ideally would become common practices, and often those don't know where to go. So something that we feel that we observe very often when someone perhaps is new to their philanthropy is that they need their confidence building up, because it is very opaque. It's very difficult to navigate the space, to know where to go. And that's even as a wealth holder, when you sort of think, well, how difficult can it be? I'll just, you know, call up this person and, you know, connect with that person that's within my network. Actually, it's really hard. And, you know, we're always hearing, I'm not saying anything new here, but we're always hearing how isolating that is. And so I think, you know, we do see people looking for the kind of like the peer-to-peer connections. So for just to use TPW as an example, because it's obviously the one I know best, we're not actually philanthropy advisors. What we're focused on is giving the sort of the how-to, the approaches. So equipping people with the knowledge, the tools, the frameworks, the roadmaps to then go off and decide how they are going to you know, enact their strategy, deploy their resource. And that's often with a sort of a total portfolio approach, so going beyond philanthropy. We talk a lot about tackling of the root causes. So that comes back down to Melissa's point about some people are seeking to make a change in the world. And I think the people that typically we're working with are thinking about that. They're really coming because they want to do something differently. Of course, there are lots of people who are exactly very focused, you know, deep relationships, deep commitment, without whom some of the bigger institutions wouldn't continue to function. So I think we, you know, we made a shift about 4 years ago now to really sort of say we can continue to bring experts to the front of the room, and there is some extraordinary content, particularly in the wake of everyone becoming much more comfortable with sort of webinars and virtual learning. You're getting many more perspectives in a room. A webinar is a much richer experience than it used to be. But at the same time, what we were hearing from everyone was there weren't enough convening spaces for people to come together to learn from one another, the people who are actually doing a lot of this work. And that's where I think we've seen a lot of changes. The peer-to-peer influencing piece is, as with any relationship in life, that is can play such a big role in driving people forward, but also in literally asking for the information. Who are you talking to? Who have you worked with? Who have you seen doing this well? Where are the latest innovations and trends? And that's information that should be easily available and frankly just isn't.
And I think, Marie-Louise, just picking up on that, that's something that's only going to increase further as the next generation of wealth holders get more and more involved, because that is something that they are very good at, I think, connecting and seeking out, sharing those experiences. The philanthropists on Instagram, bring that on and have them inspire and encourage each other and learn from each other. I think that's definitely, hopefully something we'll see a lot more of.
And just to add to that, Catherine, I completely agree. And I think it's very easy to connect people who you sort of see have, shared outlooks or shared goals or are really, tackling the same cause. But what we're also kind of really wanting to help encourage is like, where are the serendipitous kind of, meetings of the minds that wouldn't necessarily happen unless you're kind of together in the room and eyeballing one another. So it's creating some of those spaces as well, where it's not obvious that things, change can happen. And I think the other thing that we're really focused on at the moment is how also do you make sure you're bringing all of the people around the sort of metaphorical table with whom you have a shared goal. So that goes well beyond, the wealth holder, the philanthropist, but the different community leaders, the innovators, the disruptors, the activists. Where are those people where you're all actually driving for the same, the same sort of shared ultimate goal? And I think what we're seeing or really encouraging people to do is understand what their specific role is kind of within that, and how are you all coming together to tackle that goal. And sometimes it's very easy to see, and sometimes it happens when people just kind of meet and suddenly share this idea or a vision, or and it wouldn't be something that you would be able to instantly sort of know about.
I think the issue of the next generation and how the philanthropic education and advisory community can be involved is a really fascinating one. It seems to us, at least in our experience at Rockefeller Philanthropy, that that younger generations are really interested in using all of their assets to achieve their goals, and that includes not just what all of us, have started with, which is the actual philanthropic giving, but it includes investing, it includes purchasing, it includes employment, it includes using your social voice and your media influence, your advocacy, and it's a much more holistic approach to making change than simply a box that says, here's the box in which I make money, geared only toward financial return, and here's the box in which I give money away with a set of social goals. Older generations, baby boomers, et cetera, are often comfortable keeping things in those two boxes, but younger generations don't see those as different boxes at all.
No, and I've got a great example.
Which is great.
Yeah, a great example of that. One of our clients that we're working with, they're still in the wealth creation mode, and in their business, they are building in a very visible element of their philanthropy, partly because they want to give it away as the business is increasing and generating profits. But it's also for them a statement to their peers and others within their network about what they're doing, with the aim of encouraging those to do likewise. It's really interesting. It's building into the business model and using everything that they have, not just the money they're giving, to try and increase the overall amount going in.
Can I, on that, Catherine? So in the sense of from an advisor's perspective, so not a professional philanthropy advisor, but any other of the other disciplines that are out there, in respect to what Melissa said about respecting the client and the client need and whether or not they want any advice in this area, how can you tell? How do you know? How does a professional advisor know that this is a conversation they need to be having with their clients?
Well, I'll give you the opposite. I'll tell you how you won't know. You won't know if you don't ask the question. I've never, when working with all my different clients and families, I've never had a bad reaction to posing the question or asking them about their philanthropy, what they're doing, whether they're interested in doing more, what their experience has been. It's always been a good conversation. And out of that, some of them will not be doing much and be quite happy not doing much. And my role as an advisor isn't to try and convert them, but actually there's plenty more who at the very least you engage them with a real kind of relationship building conversation, because it's often those who are doing something already, something that they are passionate and want to talk about. But actually I've found in asking those questions, as Mary-Lou was saying before, many just aren't aware that they're able to get this body of help, that it's out there at all. And so that as somebody who doesn't do philanthropy day in, day out, actually, there are so many people in the network that Philanthropy Impact have created that you can reach out to where your expertise ends. In fact, I was meeting this afternoon with a philanthropy advisor who their skills neatly start where mine end. So there's plenty of ways in which you can have that conversation. And then if it's not something that you as an individual have the skills, or it's not something that your firm has the appetite to continue to deliver, you can, through the network, ensure that the clients are supported. And the first step to doing that, I'd encourage everybody on the call, is to look at the sort of plan that Philanthropy Impact have developed around the different stages of a client's philanthropic journey, and map out which your firm can help and support with, and have a think about how you fill those blanks, because that's a great way to build confidence that you don't need to know all the answers before you start the conversation, if you know who to go to for answers for where you have gaps yourself.
So I was just looking there. There's a great plug. Thank you very much. I have to say that the 23 distinct services I hadn't known about before I came to Philanthropy Impact myself, and did their training with them. But it's the idea that you teach about the advisory wheel and where you fit in that, and learning that really does help empower you to have these conversations. I think, would you agree with the idea that knowledge is power here for advisors? And I'm going to throw that to Mary-Lou as well after you've answered that, Karen.
Yeah. So I think it is power, but it can also potentially be fear. And I think Melissa made a good point that you want people who know their stuff to be helping you in philanthropy as much as in any other area. And we all know that the problems you can get into if you don't have good advisors. But I think in context of philanthropy, people are often concerned because they don't know as much as, say, Mary-Lou or Melissa, not to have any conversation around it. And so I think the more that you learn, the more knowledge you have, the more empowered you are to have those conversations. But you don't need to know everything about everything in order to be able to help your clients if they want to be more philanthropic.
Would you agree with that, Melissa?
I would absolutely agree with that. I think that in some ways what we're doing is helping people sort out options. And even if we don't have the answer for the right approach to a particular issue, we can talk about, here are the approaches that have been tried, here's what some of the results are, and then give people a sense of how they see themselves in this movie, so to speak, right? Not everybody wants to fund research. Not everybody wants to fund policy, et cetera. So I think that we can, without necessarily having to be a deep expert in every single field, help them understand the landscape that they're operating in.
So just before I move this to you, Mary-Lou, we've had Michelle Fugel-Gardner has come in with the question around women of wealth. And I just wanted to bring that in because I think part of this discussion as well, because we're talking about next gen, but in that is also the great transfer of wealth to majority women. How are people finding their advice? That's what the question is. You've mentioned the next gen, and I'd add women and other those who aren't historically services in this space? How are people finding their advice? And so that's what I was going to ask you, Marie-Louise. Sorry, we've only got a few minutes. But is there part of this work that we need to do is actually informing clients themselves that they have this ability to seek this advice?
I think that question actually ties in really beautifully, because I think coming back to sort of is knowledge power, the underpinning thing that we always go for is kind of like, where do we have the trust to go to the people that we feel will be able to help guide us on the journey? I think something that we have observed recently about ourselves as an organization, but I've observed it kind of across a number of spheres, is that we're sometimes intellectualizing the discussion too much, and actually we're kind of assuming that, and this kind of comes back down to unhelpful power dynamics as much as anything, is that we're kind of assuming a very high level of knowledge, and actually that can be quite off-putting to people. So you almost need to create this space that kind of is very, very encouraging, builds upon the trust. Philanthropy is inherently very personal. We cannot get away from that. And as much as we absolutely seek to say to people, well, you've got to start to look kind of externally, look at the intractable issues. Where do you think you can make a difference? But if you don't align those back with your personal, your principles, motivations, values, etc., you're not going to stay the course and really have the greatest impact that you can have. So I think coming back to the actual question, people often start with their networks. That's a very obvious place to go. And that can be great, but it can also be limiting, because you're starting from a point of trust. And I think actually what you need to do is kind of say, well, if I don't have trust with someone already, that can mean that you don't necessarily look kind of more broadly at what some of the other options are. So we've been having conversations recently that sort of, how do you almost end with trust? So you enter a very open kind of like conversation and relationship, knowing that it's a continual learning journey. There's a degree of kind of humility and vulnerability that's required, and that you end up with a trusted relationship that might help take you forward. I don't know if that made sense. I probably didn't explain that terribly well. But I think it's always about understanding what your motivations are, using your networks, speaking to peers, speaking to any advisors that you can find. There is more on the internet. There have been some extraordinary kind of, I would say, again, it's going back to this increase of online content that is now available, thanks in part to the pandemic. It is a little easier to navigate, just talking to anyone who's involved. And I think the other thing I would just add in is, is philanthropy only a kind of an elite sport? And actually there are people practicing it at different levels. And if they've really found a good lever of change, it doesn't have to be that they have to go to kind of like, one specific, philanthropy advisor to get advice. There's lots of different places where someone can start that journey.
So we are now, thank you, Marie-Louise, we are now at the half an hour mark, and I should be closing down. But I wanted to talk about, following on from that, reputational risk and failures, but I don't think we're going to have time. But I think it's really key points you've all made just now about this idea that there is too much information out there. If you try doing it that way, you can very quickly become overwhelmed with the need, with the charities. I mean, there's so many in the UK alone, let alone globally. So what I would like to ask you all to do is just give me 30-second takeaways that you'd like the audience to take away with them. And I will start with you, Catherine.
Oh goodness, no thinking time there. I think, the fact that everyone listening, you're listening to this because you're obviously interested and curious in this space, and to a range of different degrees of expertise, my encouragement would be, to remember you don't need to be the expert, you don't need to have all the answers. And actually, sometimes it can be helpful to engage in that conversation. And as long as the clients know you're not holding yourself out to be the sort of source and font of all knowledge on the topic, have that conversation, but then just know where to come when you reach the end of your expertise and your ability to help. And if you don't know where to come, have a look at everything that Philanthropy Impact has, because that will help.
Thanks, Catherine. Melissa.
Thank you. I would like to leave with everybody the thought that in terms of how you sort through knowledge and ideas, of which there are a plethora, including a lot of knowledge that is wrong, it's helpful to ask yourself and your client, have we spoken to the people who are closest to this issue, who have a level of insight and a kind of knowledge that we don't have, and that is possibly what should be put at the center of the conversation.
Great, thank you. And Mary-Lou.
Thank you. Some terrific comments have been made by Melissa and Catherine. To go sort of almost one step beyond, I would also encourage people to really think about what is your role? What can you do to influence others, whether that's sharing knowledge, whether that's widening your own networks, whether that's thinking about different ways of doing things, talking to partners on the ground, talking to communities. But I think almost beyond that, it's what are you giving back? So not only what are you learning, what are you sharing, but how are you contributing to kind of towards the wider sector knowledge that exists? Like, where are these kind of central, like, repositories almost of information? Because I think the greatest influence comes from people who are already involved, and there are so many people who would be thrilled and delighted to have some of these conversations and often simply don't know how to find one another. So here there are spaces that we should encourage, Philanthropy Impact being absolutely one of those.
Yeah, thank you. That's and the philanthropy workshop, there's Speaking Club, there's so many now, but please do come to us and we can point them all, like you all. So there is one comment left just before we leave, which I will take as my 30-second final, is from Jess Maybanks at the Brook, and what she's demonstrated in her comment, I'm not going to read it all because it's quite big, but she's thanking Melissa, she's thanking Mary-Lou and Catherine, all for the different ways that she's been helped as a fundraiser for this charity over the years from the network. And I just think that that demonstrates massively what we're saying here, is that we are a collaborative place and we need to be working together to do this, and we all have our place as philanthropy advisors, professional advisors, trainers, anything. We have our place in the sector to try and make it better and make it so that clients can have fun when they do their philanthropy, which I think is incredibly important. Right, we are well over. I'm going to get into trouble with John. And thank you so much for your time. And don't forget that this will be available on YouTube at any point. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to join. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.